You know that feeling when you're scrolling through personality content and something just clicks differently? When you read about INFJs and think, wait, this isn't just a personality type. This feels like a diagnosis. Well, trust me, you're not imagining it. AI researchers have been analyzing cognitive patterns, and they've stumbled onto something that changes everything we thought we knew about the rarest personality type. When machine learning algorithms scan INFJ behavioral data, they don't see personality quirks. They see neurological anomalies, patterns that consistently flag as neurodivergent thinking systems. What if I told you that being an INFJ isn't just rare? It's actually your brain running on completely different software than the neurotypical world around you. But there's a specific reason society decided to call this a personality instead of a neurological difference, and it wasn't an accident. Before we start, please hit the like button, comment, and subscribe so you won't miss any of our weekly deep dives into the world of personality types. And if you're looking for a deeper understanding of yourself and your INFJ personality, browse our favorite INFJ products in the description, and click the link in the comments to take our favorite free personality test, the mislabeling problem. Here's what's been happening for decades. Society needed a way to categorize people who think differently without making them feel broken. So we created personality typing. We gave people like you a comfortable label that explained away all those moments when you felt like an alien trying to blend in with humans. But let's be real about what INFJ traits actually describe. That overwhelming sensitivity to your environment, that's not just being intuitive, that's sensory processing differences. The way you absorb other people's emotions until you can't tell what's yours and what's theirs, that's not empathy, that's emotional hypervigilance, a classic neurodivergent survival mechanism. Most people miss this next detail, but it changes how you view every single quirk you've ever had. Think about how INFJs are described. Highly sensitive, needs lots of alone time, struggles with small talk, gets overwhelmed in social situations, processes information differently, has intense interests, notices patterns others miss. If you put that list in front of any neurodivergent specialist, they'd immediately start asking about autism or ADHD screening. But here's the thing. Calling it a personality type feels safer, doesn't it? Personality suggests choice. It suggests you could change if you really wanted to. It puts the responsibility on you to adapt to a world that feels fundamentally wrong for how your brain operates. The 16-type system became this brilliant shield. Instead of saying your brain works differently, we said you prefer introversion. Instead of acknowledging sensory overload, we called it needing to recharge. Instead of recognizing executive function challenges, we labeled it perfectionism and overthinking. And you learn to frame everything through this personality lens. When you couldn't handle the fluorescent lights at work, you told yourself, INFJs are just sensitive. When you needed 3 days to recover from a social event, you thought, that's just how introverts recharge. When you struggled to make phone calls or handle routine tasks, you believed you were just being difficult or lazy. But what happens when we stop using personality as a comfortable explanation and start looking at the actual cognitive science? What happens when we acknowledge that your brain might not be running the same operating system as the majority of people around you? The relief you felt when you discovered you were an INFJ. That wasn't just finding your tribe. That was the relief of finally having language for experiences that felt impossible to explain. But here's what I want you to consider. What if that relief was actually your neurodivergent brain recognizing itself in a description that finally made sense? Because when you dig into the research, something becomes crystal clear. The traits that make someone identify as INFJ overlap significantly with documented neurodivergent cognitive patterns. We're not talking about surface-level similarities. We're talking about fundamental differences in how information gets processed, how emotions get regulated, and how social energy gets managed. The personality typing world gave you a label that felt validating. But it also might have kept you from understanding that your brain genuinely works differently. That those struggles you've been trying to personality hack your way through might actually need neurodivergent strategies and support systems. Think about it this way. If you've been trying to fix your INFJ traits or optimize your personality, what you've actually been doing is trying to force a neurodivergent brain to operate like a neurotypical one. No wonder traditional self-help advice never quite worked for you. No wonder you felt like you were constantly swimming upstream. The mislabeling isn't malicious. It's protective. Society wasn't ready to acknowledge that some brains just work differently without pathologizing them. So we created this middle ground where different thinking patterns got reframed as personality preferences. But that protection came with a cost. It kept you from accessing resources and strategies that actually work for how your brain operates. So before we go any deeper into what this means, let me ask you something. What if you stopped trying to optimize your personality and started learning to operate your neurodivergent system? What if those INFJ traits aren't quirks to manage, but features of a different cognitive architecture that just needs the right environment to thrive? Now everything I've told you about your brain won't make sense until you understand the hidden performance you've been putting on since childhood. The masking system. How INFJs became social chameleons. Here's where things get really interesting. From childhood, most INFJs develop what researchers call sophisticated masking behaviors. But here's what's wild about this. You probably don't even realize you're doing it, because it became so automatic, so early in your development. Masking is when you consciously or unconsciously hide your natural responses to fit social expectations. It's exhausting cognitive work that happens in real time. You're constantly running calculations about how to appear normal, while your brain is processing the world in ways that feel fundamentally different from everyone around you. Think about how this shows up in your daily life. You walk into a room and immediately scan for exits, not because you're paranoid, but because your nervous system needs to know where safety is. You modulate your voice to match the energy of whoever you're talking to. You force eye contact, even though it feels like staring directly into the sun. You laugh at jokes that aren't funny because you've learned that's what people expect. But here's the thing that makes INFJ masking different from regular social adaptation. You're not just managing your behavior, you're managing your entire sensory and emotional experience. That fluorescent lighting is making your skin crawl, but you can't say anything because that would be weird. That person's emotional energy is flooding your system, but you have to pretend you don't notice. The noise level is overwhelming, but everyone else seems fine, so you push through. This is classic neurodivergent masking territory. The constant monitoring of your responses, the exhaustion that comes from performing normalcy all day, the way you crash completely when you finally get home and can drop the act. Most people don't experience social interaction as this level of conscious performance. And let's talk about that crash. Because it's not just introvert recharge time. After masking all day, your entire nervous system goes into recovery mode. You might need hours or even days of complete solitude. You might feel physically ill from the effort. Your executive function might completely shut down. Simple tasks like making dinner or answering texts become impossible. This is your neurodivergent brain saying, enough. I've been running background processes all day, trying to appear neurotypical, and now I need to shut down non-essential functions to recover. But because you've been told this is just how INFJs recharge, you might not realize this level of social exhaustion isn't typical. Here's where the masking gets really sophisticated. INFJs become incredible at reading microexpressions and social cues, not because they're naturally empathetic, but because their survival depends on it. When your brain works differently, you learn to become a social detective. You study people like they're complex systems you need to navigate. You develop this uncanny ability to mirror whoever you're with. With your analytical friend, you become more logical. With your emotional friend, you become more feeling. With your extroverted colleague, you dial up your energy. It's not manipulation, it's adaptation. Your brain learned early that blending in was safer than standing out. But this social chameleon ability comes with a cost. After years of shifting to match others, you might lose track of who you actually are underneath all that adaptation. You might find yourself in relationships or situations that don't actually fit because you've gotten so good at molding yourself to what others need. The door slam that INFJs are famous for. That's not about being judgmental or dramatic. That's what happens when the cognitive load of maintaining a relationship becomes unsustainable. When the masking required to keep that person comfortable becomes more than your system can handle. You cut ties to protect your mental and emotional energy. Think about the relationships you've door slammed. I bet they were situations where you felt like you couldn't be authentic, where you had to perform a version of yourself that felt exhausting to maintain. Your brain made an executive decision that the energy cost was too high. This masking system explains so much about why INFJs are drawn to psychology and self-improvement. You're not trying to fix what's broken. You're trying to understand why the world feels so difficult to navigate. You're looking for strategies to make the masking less exhausting, or ways to find environments where you can drop the act. But here's what changes everything. Once you understand that this isn't just personality quirks, but actual neurodivergent coping mechanisms, you can start making different choices. You can start asking, not how do I get better at masking, but where can I safely unmask? Not how do I fix my sensitivity, but how do I honor what my nervous system actually needs? Now this next part is where things get interesting, because it explains why people think you're psychic when the reality is actually much more technical. The pattern recognition engine, your brain on hyperdrive. Now let's dive into what might be the most fascinating part of the INFJ neurodivergent connection. That uncanny intuition you're known for. That ability to just know things about people or situations without being able to explain how. Here's the thing, you're not psychic. Your brain is just processing massive amounts of data at lightning speed below your conscious awareness. Think about how this actually works in your daily life. You walk into a room and immediately sense tension between two people. You can't point to specific evidence, but you just know something's off. What's actually happening is your brain is rapidly analyzing microexpressions, facial tension, body language, vocal patterns, and environmental cues. It's cross-referencing this data with thousands of previous social interactions and arriving at conclusions faster than your conscious mind can track. This is classic neurodivergent pattern recognition. While neurotypical brains tend to process information more linearly, your brain is running multiple parallel processes simultaneously. You're not just listening to what someone says, you're analyzing how they say it, what they're not saying, what their body language contradicts, and how all of this fits with patterns you've observed before. This explains why INFJs are often called eerily accurate about people. You're not reading minds, you're reading data. Your brain has become this incredibly sophisticated pattern matching system that can detect inconsistencies and connections that others miss entirely. It's like having a supercomputer running social and environmental analysis in the background of every interaction. But here's where it gets really interesting from a neurodivergent perspective. This pattern recognition doesn't just apply to people. INFJs often have this ability to see connections between seemingly unrelated concepts. You might be reading about psychology and suddenly make a connection to something you learned about physics or history. Your brain is constantly finding these unexpected bridges between different domains of knowledge. This is what researchers call associative thinking, and it's incredibly common in neurodivergent populations. Instead of thinking in straight lines from A to B to C, your brain is processing A, B, C, D, E, and F simultaneously, finding relationships between all of them and arriving at insights that seem to come out of nowhere. The problem is this pattern recognition engine never really shuts off. While other people can tune out background information, your brain is constantly collecting and processing. Environmental data, that person's slight change in tone, the way the lighting shifted when clouds moved across the sun, the subtle change in energy when someone walked into the room. Your brain is cataloging all of it. This creates what many INFJs describe as mental overwhelm. It's not just that you're thinking too much. It's that your brain is processing too much. You're running this incredibly sophisticated analysis system that's designed to detect patterns and anomalies, but it's running constantly without an off switch. This explains why you need so much alone time. It's not just about recharging social energy. It's about giving your pattern recognition system a break. When you're alone, your brain can finally stop analyzing social dynamics and environmental changes. It can shift from hypervigilance mode to rest mode. But here's what's fascinating about this from a strategic perspective. This pattern recognition ability is actually an incredible advantage when you learn to work with it instead of against it. You can spot trends before others see them. You can identify problems in systems before they become obvious. You can understand people's motivations and predict their behavior with startling accuracy. The key is learning to manage the data flow. Instead of trying to turn off your pattern recognition, which is impossible, you can learn to direct it strategically. You can choose what patterns to focus on and when to give your system breaks from constant analysis. This is why many INFJs are drawn to fields like psychology, research, strategic planning, or creative work. These are areas where pattern recognition and associative thinking are actual superpowers, where the ability to see connections others miss becomes a professional advantage rather than just an exhausting quirk. Once you understand that your intuition is actually rapid-fire pattern processing, you can start to trust it differently. You can start to see it as valid data rather than just a feeling. And you can begin to communicate your insights in ways that others can understand and value. The emotional processing overload. Let's talk about something that might hit closer to home than anything we've covered so far. That overwhelming empathy that defines the INFJ experience. But here's what I need you to understand. What you call empathy might actually be emotional hypervigilance, and that's a completely different neurological process. Most people experience empathy as a choice. They can tune into someone else's feelings when they want to and tune out when they need to. But for you, it's not optional. You walk into a room and immediately absorb the emotional atmosphere. Someone's anxiety becomes your anxiety. Their sadness floods your system. Their anger makes your nervous system spike, even when it has nothing to do with you. This isn't just being sensitive or caring deeply. This is your brain processing emotional data as if it's environmental information critical to your survival. It's emotional hypervigilance, and it's exhausting, because you can't turn it off. You're constantly scanning for emotional threats or changes in the people around you. Think about how this shows up in your relationships. You can feel when someone's mood shifts before they even realize it themselves. You pick up on resentment or disappointment that they haven't even acknowledged yet. You're processing their micro-expressions, vocal changes, and energy shifts as emotional data that your system treats as urgent information. But here's where it gets really challenging. Because you're absorbing all this emotional information, you often lose track of what's actually yours. You might feel anxious and spend hours trying to figure out why, only to realize you picked it up from your coworker's stress about their presentation. You might feel inexplicably sad until you remember your friend was going through a breakup and you absorb their grief. This emotional data processing creates what researchers call empathy fatigue. It's not that you stop caring, it's that your emotional processing system gets completely overwhelmed. Imagine if your brain treated every person's feelings as equally important as your own. Imagine the cognitive load of constantly managing not just your emotional state, but everyone else's too. This explains why INFJs often struggle with boundaries. When you're processing other people's emotions as if they're environmental data, it becomes really hard to separate their needs from your needs. Their discomfort feels like your discomfort. Their disappointment feels like your failure. You end up people-pleasing not because you're weak, but because your nervous system is trying to regulate everyone's emotional state to create a safe environment. The physical exhaustion that comes with this emotional processing is real. After spending time around emotionally intense people, you might feel completely drained. Not just tired, but physically depleted, like you've been running a marathon. That's because emotional hypervigilance uses enormous amounts of cognitive energy. Here's what makes this particularly challenging for INFJs. You often become the emotional regulator in your friend groups and families. People come to you with their problems because you absorb their feelings and help them process. But what they don't realize is that you're not just listening. You're literally taking on their emotional burden. This creates a cycle where you become indispensable to others, but completely overwhelmed yourself. You might find yourself in relationships where you're constantly managing someone else's emotional state, while your own needs get completely ignored. Not because you're codependent, but because your brain is processing their emotional dysregulation as a threat to your own nervous system. Traditional self-care advice doesn't work for this system. Taking a bubble bath isn't going to reset your emotional processing overload. You need strategies that specifically address nervous system regulation and emotional boundary setting. You need to understand that your empathy isn't unlimited, and treating it like it is will burn out your entire system. Once you recognize that your emotional intensity isn't a personality flaw, but a different way of processing emotional information, everything changes. You can start making choices about when and how to engage your emotional processing system, instead of having it run automatically in every situation. You might be wondering why you can solve world problems, but can't make a phone call. The answer isn't laziness, and it's something most INFJs never realize until it's too late. The executive function paradox. Here's where things get really confusing for most INFJs, and honestly, it might be the most frustrating part of having a neurodivergent brain that nobody talks about. You can hyper-focus for 12 hours straight on a creative project that matters to you. You can research your special interests until you become an expert. You can solve complex problems and see patterns that others miss completely, but ask you to make a doctor's appointment, and suddenly it feels like climbing Mount Everest. Paying bills becomes this insurmountable task that you put off for weeks. Returning phone calls feels impossible, even when they're important. Simple routine tasks that neurotypical people handle without thinking become these massive cognitive barriers. This is the executive function paradox, and it's classic neurodivergent territory. Your brain operates on what researchers call an interest-based nervous system, instead of an importance-based one. Neurotypical brains can generally tackle tasks based on how important they are, even if they're boring or mundane. Your brain needs engagement and meaning to function optimally. When something captures your interest, your executive function works perfectly. You can plan, organize, prioritize, and execute complex projects with incredible focus and attention to detail. You might spend hours perfecting something that matters to you, completely losing track of time and forgetting to eat. This isn't procrastination or poor time management. It's hyperfocus, and it's a neurodivergent superpower. But flip the switch to routine administrative tasks, and everything changes. Your brain literally can't generate the same level of executive control for things that don't engage your interest-based nervous system. It's not laziness or lack of discipline. It's a fundamental difference in how your cognitive resources get allocated. This creates what looks like inconsistent performance to the outside world. People see you produce incredible work on projects you care about and assume you're just being difficult or lazy when you struggle with basic tasks. But the reality is, your executive function is task-dependent, not consistently available across all activities. The shame cycle around this is brutal. You internalize messages that you're capable when you want to be, but just not trying hard enough for the boring stuff. You develop elaborate systems to try to force yourself to care about mundane tasks. You beat yourself up for being able to research obscure topics for hours, but struggling to schedule routine appointments. But here's what changes everything. Once you understand that your brain works differently, you can stop trying to force neurotypical executive function strategies and start working with your actual cognitive architecture. Instead of fighting your interest-based nervous system, you can learn to hack it. This might mean pairing boring tasks with something that does engage your brain, or creating artificial urgency or consequences that make routine tasks feel more important, or batching administrative work into focus sessions when your executive function is running optimally. The key is understanding that your executive function isn't broken. It's just wired differently. When you stop trying to force it to work like a neurotypical brain and start designing systems that work with your actual cognitive patterns, everything becomes more manageable. Your inconsistent executive function isn't a character flaw. It's information about how your brain operates. And once you have that information, you can start making strategic choices about how to structure your life and work in ways that honor your actual cognitive needs. Now, none of these insights will actually change your life unless you know how to flip the switch on your internal operating system. Operating your neurodivergent system. Now that you understand what's actually happening in your brain, let's talk about how to work with your neurodivergent system instead of against it. Because here's the thing. You've probably spent years trying to fix yourself or optimize your personality, when what you actually needed was an operating manual for a different type of brain. First, let's reframe everything you've been calling weaknesses. That's sensory sensitivity that makes crowded places overwhelming. That's not a flaw. That's your brain's advanced environmental monitoring system. Instead of trying to push through sensory overload, start treating it as valuable data. When your system says this environment is too much, listen to it. Create sensory-friendly spaces at home and work. Invest in noise-canceling headphones. Dim harsh lighting. Honor what your nervous system actually needs. Your need for extensive alone time isn't antisocial behavior, it's cognitive maintenance. Your brain processes more information more intensely than neurotypical brains. That processing power requires downtime to prevent system overload. Stop apologizing for needing recovery time after social interactions. Start scheduling it proactively. Block out time after social events. Communicate your needs clearly without over-explaining. That pattern recognition engine we talked about. Learn to direct it strategically instead of letting it run wild. When you're in hyperfocus mode on your special interests, use that time for deep work on projects that matter. When your brain is making those rapid-fire connections between seemingly unrelated concepts, capture those insights. Keep a notebook or voice recorder for when your associative thinking produces breakthrough ideas. For the emotional processing overload, develop what I call emotional firewalls. You don't have to absorb everyone's feelings just because your brain is wired to pick up on them. Practice identifying which emotions are actually yours. Create physical and energetic boundaries with people who consistently drain your emotional resources. It's not selfish, it's system maintenance. Learn to communicate your neurodivergent needs without shame. You can tell people that you process information differently, that certain environments are overwhelming for you, that you need time to think before responding to complex questions. You don't need to provide a detailed explanation or justify your brain's operating system. Most people will respect clear, direct communication about your needs. Find your tribe. And I don't just mean other INFJs. Connect with neurodivergent communities online and in person. Surround yourself with people who understand that different doesn't mean broken. Seek out environments where you can unmask safely, where your intensity and depth are valued, rather than seen as too much. Use your executive function paradox strategically. Instead of forcing yourself to care about boring tasks, find ways to make them engaging. Gamify routine activities. Pair mundane tasks with something that interests you. Batch administrative work when your executive function is running optimally. Stop trying to be consistently productive across all task types, and start designing systems that work with your interest-based nervous system. Embrace your hyperfocus as a superpower, but learn to manage it sustainably. Set timers to remind yourself to eat and drink water during deep work sessions. Communicate with others when you're entering hyperfocus mode, so they know you're not ignoring them. Use your periods of intense focus strategically on projects that align with your goals and values. Most importantly, stop trying to force yourself into neurotypical molds. The world needs brains that work differently. Your pattern recognition, emotional intelligence, and ability to see connections others miss are genuine advantages in the right contexts. Instead of trying to minimize these traits, learn to leverage them strategically. Your neurodivergent brain isn't something to overcome. It's something to understand and optimize. When you stop fighting your cognitive architecture and start working with it, you'll find that many of the things you thought were personal failings were actually just mismatched strategies for a different type of brain. So here's what I need you to understand. You're not broken. You're not too much or too sensitive or too intense. Your brain is running different software, and that's not only okay, it's valuable. The challenges you face are real, but so are your strengths. The pattern recognition, the emotional intelligence, the ability to see connections others miss. These are features, not bugs. The AI research we talked about isn't pathologizing your personality. It's validating your experience. You've always known you were wired differently, and now you have the language and framework to understand why. Stop trying to fix what isn't broken, and start learning to operate your neurodivergent system for maximum power. If this resonated with you, explore neurodivergent resources and communities. Check out the other videos on our channel where we dive deeper into how your mind really works. And remember, being different isn't a flaw, it's just different. And different can be your greatest advantage. If you want to continue the journey to understanding yourself or an INFJ in your life, click either of the following videos where we continue to unlock the secrets of the INFJ personality type.